December 17th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Grenadier Erich Schmidt pressed his pencil against his frozen diary, recording observations that would transform his understanding of modern combat. The Americans operate differently than the Russians. Their artillery represents something unprecedented, not merely the volume of fire, though that alone proves formidable. It's the rapidity, the precision, the awareness that reaction time has been eliminated. Through the heavy fog that morning, Schmidt had observed something that challenged every operational assumption German forces held about American military capabilities. His battalion, positioned within the 6th SS Panzer Army, had just initiated Hitler's final Western gamble. They had secured complete tactical surprise against lightly defended American sectors. Success appeared imminent. Then, American artillery engaged them. What Schmidt couldn't comprehend, what no German soldier advancing through those snow-covered forests could have anticipated, was their encounter with the most effective artillery coordination system ever fielded. A system so sophisticated, so overwhelming, and so methodically integrated that it would halt Germany's final Western offensive and demonstrate the genuine extent of American military advancement. The operational collapse had begun long before the Ardennes engagement. Throughout 1943 and 1944, German veterans transferred from Eastern Front operations to confront American forces in Italy, France, and the Low Countries, carried assumptions forged through desperate encounters with Soviet artillery methods. They had developed survival techniques against Russian bombardments through harsh practical experience. Soviet artillery followed predictable patterns. The Russians would fire ranging rounds, providing German troops critical seconds to locate cover. Shells arrived in sequential patterns, permitting movement between salvos. Fire coordination proved consistently slow, requiring 10 to 15 minutes from observation to impact delivery. The Americans operated under entirely different principles, terrifyingly different principles. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, a 2-year Eastern Front veteran captured with the Afrika Korps in Tunisia during May 1943, later described his initial encounter with American artillery methodology in post-war documentation. We had established positions in a wadi north of Tunis. Adequate concealment, we believed. The Russians would have required an hour for location and another hour for ranging calculations. We felt sufficiently secure to prepare morning rations. Then we observed it. A small aircraft, no larger than a reconnaissance platform, operating overhead at perhaps 500 meters altitude. We barely registered concern. Such aircraft carried no ordnance. We assumed photographic reconnaissance. 3 minutes elapsed. Without warning, without ranging rounds, without any preliminary indication whatsoever, the entire wadi erupted. Shells landing simultaneously, not sequentially. Air bursts above our positions, ground impacts among us. Within 30 seconds, my company ceased functioning as a combat unit. I was one of 11 survivors from 123 personnel. The aircraft Schmidt had observed was an L-4 Grasshopper, the American Forward Observer's aerial platform. These unassuming Piper Cubs would become the most concerning aircraft in German military consideration. Not for any weapons they transported, but for what followed their appearance. German soldiers learned a harsh operational reality. When you observed a Grasshopper overhead, you had minutes, perhaps only seconds, before American artillery converted your position into a devastation zone. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, an artillery officer who had coordinated counter-battery operations on the Eastern Front, documented his professional astonishment in correspondence discovered decades later in German military archives. I studied American artillery procedures from captured documentation. Initially, I believed these documents represented misinformation, propaganda designed to create uncertainty. No artillery system could perform as described. The coordination required would be operationally impossible. Then I witnessed it personally. Near Cisterna di Littoria, an American Grasshopper appeared. We tracked it, preparing standard displacement procedures for our guns. Before we could relocate, before we had even computed firing data for counter-battery engagement, American shells were impacting our position. Not random fire, not area saturation, precise fire on each gun emplacement. They had calculated firing solutions, coordinated multiple batteries at different ranges, and delivered simultaneous fire in less time than our own, forward observers required, to radio map coordinates to our fire direction center. The foundation of American artillery superiority resided not in a single innovation, but in a comprehensive system that integrated technology, training, and industrial capacity at levels Germany could never achieve. The cornerstone was the Fire Direction Center, a concept that revolutionized artillery employment methodology. Where German artillery batteries calculated firing solutions individually, American batteries transmitted all data to a central fire direction center that could coordinate fire from dozens of batteries simultaneously. This centralized approach transformed artillery from independent batteries into a unified weapon system. The FDC system depended on pre-computed firing tables. In offices across the United States, rooms of personnel worked with mechanical calculators, slide rules, and logarithm tables, computing firing solutions for every conceivable combination of variables: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barrel wear, propellant temperature, altitude differences between gun and target. These tables, printed in books compact enough for map case storage, allowed American fire direction officers to calculate precise firing solutions in minutes rather than hours. Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann, a mathematics professor integrated into Wehrmacht artillery operations, examined captured American firing tables following the war. His analysis, preserved in German military records, revealed his professional recognition. These tables represent years of computational work, thousands of hours on mechanical calculators. They had computed solutions for every variable we might encounter in field operations. Our own firing tables were rudimentary by comparison, requiring extensive field calculations for each mission. The Americans had completed the mathematics in advance. In the field, they simply referenced the answer. But tables alone could not explain American artillery's overwhelming effectiveness. The genuine revolution was time on target, a firing technique so advanced that few nations possessed the capability to execute it properly. Time on target, universally designated as TOT, coordinated artillery fire so that shells from multiple batteries, fired at different times based on their distance from the target, arrived simultaneously within a 3-second window. The effect proved devastating. German soldiers experienced no warning, no ranging shots, no gradual buildup of fire. One instant, silence. The next instant, dozens of shells detonating simultaneously. Troops in exposed positions, whose survival against conventional artillery depended on immediate prone reactions at the first explosion, had no time to respond. Studies conducted following the war revealed that 66% of artillery casualties occurred within the first seconds of a barrage. Time on target maximized casualties by eliminating warning entirely. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, who survived TOT engagements during the Ardennes campaign, wrote in his diary discovered by American forces in a captured command post, "It is not artillery as we understand it. It is something unprecedented. You hear nothing. Then the world transforms. Every shell arrives in the same second. The air bursts incapacitate men who would survive ground impacts. The ground impacts incapacitate men who would survive air bursts. There is no time to seek cover, no time to reach a foxhole, no time even to drop flat. You are simply functioning one moment and wounded the next." The speed of American artillery response shocked German commanders fundamentally. German artillery, considered among the world's finest, could deliver fire in 8 to 10 minutes under ideal conditions. American artillery routinely delivered accurate fire in 3 minutes. This speed derived from multiple integrated factors. American forward observers used advanced FM radios that provided clear, interference-free communication. German forces still relied primarily on AM radios plagued by static interference. American radios were also far more numerous. Every infantry battalion had multiple radio-equipped forward observers. German battalions typically operated with 1 or 2 radios, often shared between units, creating communications bottlenecks during active operations. The forward observers themselves represented another American advantage. German forward observers were artillery officers, often lacking infantry training or tactical experience. American forward observers were specially trained personnel who understood both artillery and infantry tactics comprehensively. They moved with infantry units, operated alongside infantry soldiers, and coordinated fire as an integrated component of combined arms operations. Moreover, American artillery observers could request fire from an entire corps artillery, not merely their organic battalion. The system allowed a single forward observer to coordinate fire from dozens of batteries within minutes. A lieutenant requesting fire support could bring down ordnance equivalent to a small airstrike, delivered more accurately and more rapidly than any air support could provide. Oberst Heinrich Müller, commander of an infantry regiment neutralized near St. Lo in July 1944, documented this capability in his final operational report. A single American infantry company, surrounded in a village, held my entire regiment for 6 hours. Every time we attempted assault, artillery fire drove us back. Not from one battery, but from what seemed like dozens of batteries simultaneously. The forward observer with that company, probably a lieutenant or captain, commanded more firepower than I could bring to bear with my entire regimental artillery. We sustained 400 personnel losses attempting to overcome 120 Americans. We failed. The artillery pieces themselves demonstrated American industrial superiority comprehensively. The M2A1 105mm howitzer, the standard American light artillery piece, was a marvel of engineering and manufacturing precision. Rock Island Arsenal had perfected production techniques, allowing rapid manufacturing to precise tolerances. By World War II's conclusion, 8,536 M2A1 howitzers had been produced. Each American infantry division deployed 36 of these howitzers, organized into 3 battalions of 12 guns each. These battalions were fully motorized, towed by trucks or half-tracks that could move at highway speeds. Displacement from one firing position to another, an evolution that took German horse-drawn artillery 2 to 3 hours, took American motorized batteries 20 to 30 minutes. The contrast in operational mobility was stark. German artillery remained predominantly horse-drawn throughout the war. Despite Nazi propaganda showing mechanized panzer divisions, approximately 80% of German motive power relied on horses for transport. Germany started World War II with 514,000 horses and ended with 1,198,000 by February 1945. Each German artillery piece required 6 to 8 horses and took hours to limber, move, and unlimber. Winter conditions made movement nearly impossible. Gefreiter Paul Richter, assigned to a German artillery battery in Normandy, kept detailed documentation that survived the war. We observed American artillery displaced during active engagement. They fired their mission, then trucks appeared. Within 20 minutes, the entire battery had limbered their guns and departed. We required 2 hours minimum to perform the same evolution, assuming favorable weather and road conditions. In mud or under fire, we might need 4 hours. The Americans would establish at a new position and be ready to fire again before we had finished moving. We were fighting a 19th century operation with horses against an adversary fighting a 20th century operation with trucks. The outcome was inevitable. American 155mm howitzers provided even more devastating fire support. Each division deployed 12 M155mm howitzers in a separate battalion. These guns, firing 43-kilogram shells to ranges exceeding 14,000 meters, provided the division commander with heavy ordnance capable of neutralizing fortifications that would survive smaller caliber fire. The technical sophistication of American artillery extended to the ammunition itself. While Germany struggled with propellant shortages and inconsistent shell production, American industry delivered ammunition in seemingly unlimited quantities, manufactured to precise specifications, ensuring consistent performance. More significantly, the Americans deployed the variable time fuse, the VT fuse, a technological advancement that would prove operationally decisive. The VT fuse, also called the proximity fuse, contained a miniature radar transmitter and receiver in the artillery shell's nose. The transmitter broadcast a radio signal. When the shell approached the ground or any object, the reflected signal triggered detonation. The result was a shell that exploded at optimal height for maximum effectiveness, typically 10 to 20 meters above ground level. The VT fuse transformed artillery effectiveness fundamentally. Conventional time fuses required calculating the precise time to target, then setting the fuse accordingly. Wind, temperature, barrel wear all affected shell flight time. Even small errors meant shells exploding too high or burying themselves before detonation. The VT fuse eliminated these variables, guaranteeing optimal airburst regardless of environmental conditions. The VT fuse had first been employed operationally by the USS Helena on January 5, 1943, engaging a Japanese aircraft off Guadalcanal with only 2 to 3 salvos. Throughout 1943 and 1944, VT fuses proved devastatingly effective in naval anti-aircraft operations and against V-1 flying bombs over England. However, concerns about the technology reaching German hands prevented its use in ground artillery over Europe. General Dwight Eisenhower personally requested authorization to employ VT fuses during the Ardennes engagement, arguing that their effectiveness justified the security risk. Initial Pentagon refusal was overturned after Eisenhower's strong protest. Formal authorization came on December 19 through 21, 1944, shortly after the German offensive initiated. This marked the first employment of VT fuses against ground forces in the European theater. The decision proved operationally correct. VT-fused shells devastated German formations caught in exposed positions during the Ardennes offensive. Naval anti-aircraft tests had shown VT fuses were 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional fuses. VT fuses neutralized 79% of all incoming targets. The lethal fragment area was 3,000 square feet versus 60 square feet for conventional fuses. Some estimates suggested VT fuses increased artillery effectiveness by 200 to 700%. Troops who had learned to survive conventional artillery by seeking any ground depression discovered that VT fuses negated such cover. The shells exploded above them, showering downward with fragments that struck men prone in shallow positions. Grenadier Erich Schmidt, whose diary opened this account, survived a VT fuse barrage and recorded his experience. "We had learned on the Eastern Front to go flat at the first explosion. Even shallow depressions offered protection from fragments traveling horizontally. But these shells, these demon shells as we called them, exploded above us. The fragments came down like rain. Men in foxholes, men who should have been protected, were struck by fragments that fell vertically. There was no defense except deep bunkers, and we had no time to construct deep bunkers." The psychological impact of VT fuses compounded their physical effects. German soldiers trained to respond to artillery by seeking cover found their training irrelevant. The knowledge that no cover short of overhead protection would provide safety-induced operational paralysis. Some units refused to leave defensive positions, even under direct orders, because movement in exposed terrain meant certain outcomes if American artillery engaged them. The industrial capacity that produced American artillery and ammunition in such quantities represented another dimension of superiority that German soldiers could not comprehend. Rock Island Arsenal alone produced over 10,105 mm howitzers. Multiple factories produced 155 mm howitzers and heavier weapons. Shell production reached staggering levels throughout the war. German production, hampered by Allied bombing, resource shortages, and inefficient allocation of industrial capacity, never approached American levels. By 1944, German artillery batteries often operated at reduced strength with guns worn out and no replacements available. More critically, German ammunition production could not sustain intensive operations. German artillery batteries were often limited to minimal daily allowances, sometimes as few as 2 to 3 shells per gun per day. American batteries faced no such restrictions. Forward observers could request fire freely. knowing that ammunition supply was effectively unlimited. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, a German artillery officer, documented the ammunition crisis in his war diary. We received 50 shells per gun for the entire week, 50 shells to support an infantry regiment facing continuous American pressure. I was required to justify each fire mission to battalion, explaining why this particular target merited expenditure of irreplaceable ammunition. Meanwhile, American artillery fired thousands of shells daily with no apparent concern for conservation. We fought a poor man's operation against a rich man's adversary. The Ardennes offensive, Germany's final major Western attack, demonstrated these dynamics with brutal clarity. German planning depended on fog and overcast weather to neutralize American air power. The planners correctly assessed that American aircraft could not operate in bad weather. They failed to understand that American artillery did not require good weather. During the opening days of the offensive, German armored and infantry divisions achieved significant penetrations against surprised American forces. Over 200,000 German troops and approximately 1,000 tanks launched the initial assault on December 16, 1944. Then, American artillery engaged them systematically. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann recorded the disparity. Our battery was located in woods south of St. Vith. We had 50 shells per gun, our entire allocation for the operation. We fired a mission supporting our infantry. Within 10 minutes, American counter-battery fire neutralized 3 of our 6 guns. We attempted to displace the remaining guns, but lacked horses to move them. We abandoned the guns and withdrew on foot. This was the pattern across the entire front. Our artillery was silenced while American artillery continued operations without pause. During the entire Ardennes campaign, 4,155 American guns fired 1,255,000 artillery rounds. German units that had penetrated 50 kilometers into American lines found themselves trapped, surrounded by American forces that could request unlimited artillery support once resupply resumed. Oberst Heinrich Müller provided a stark assessment in his final report. We were overcome by American artillery before we were overcome by American infantry or armor. Every movement we made was observed by their aircraft and engaged by their artillery. Every concentration of forces was disrupted by artillery fire before we could advance. Every defensive position was neutralized by artillery before their infantry assaulted. We could not move, could not mass, could not defend effectively. The story of German soldiers and American artillery is ultimately a story about the transformation of warfare in the industrial age. Individual courage and tactical skill remained important, but they were overshadowed by industrial production, systematic training, and organizational efficiency. The Americans had created a system that amplified the capabilities of average soldiers, making them more effective than exceptional German soldiers operating with inferior systems and inadequate support. The artillery that overcame German forces in World War II was not the product of a single innovation or a brilliant individual. It was the product of systematic analysis, industrial application, comprehensive training, and abundant resources. It represented American military power at its most effective, using industrial capacity and organizational skill to create overwhelming combat power. For the German soldiers who confronted this system, the experience was transformative. They entered the war believing in German superiority. They concluded the war understanding that American industrial capacity and organizational capability had surpassed German capabilities comprehensively. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, captured in Tunisia and held at a camp in Texas, wrote in correspondence that passed American review, "I have observed American industry. I have watched trains carrying artillery pieces, hundreds of them, moving toward ports for overseas shipment. I have observed factories producing shells by the thousands. The Americans overcame us not through superior tactics or superior soldiers, though their tactics were effective and their soldiers capable. They overcame us through sheer industrial capacity. They could afford to fire 100 shells where we fired 1. They could afford to lose equipment and replace it within days. We could not match this, could never match this," regardless of how long we fought. Grenadier Erich Schmidt, whose diary chronicled his experiences in the Ardennes, reflected in his later entries. We were told the Americans were inferior soldiers, that they lacked fighting spirit, that they depended on material superiority because they lacked German skill and courage. These were inaccuracies. American soldiers fought with courage and skill, but they also fought with overwhelming material advantages that German courage and skill could not overcome. Most significantly, they fought with an artillery system so advanced that we had no effective counter. This, more than any other factor, determined the outcome. The tactical innovations developed by American artillery during World War II became the foundation for modern artillery doctrine. Time on target remains the standard method for coordinating artillery fires. Fire direction centers remain the hub of artillery operations. The basic structure established by the United States in World War II persists to this day, a testament to the revolutionary system that German soldiers learned to fear above all other weapons on the Western Front.